Ever wonder what happens when a billion-dollar empire is built on one person's back, and the CEO severs that spine just to flex his power? People say corporate loyalty is a joke, but nobody warns you that betrayal sometimes carries a price tag of 9 zeros. Yesterday, I was a discarded pawn fired over a ridiculous technicality. This morning, I hold the only key stopping the collapse of a $2.4 billion defense contract. Hello to our wonderful audience at Boss Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero operating budget, which means we are forced to halt all new video uploads here in the near future and transition our primary operations to Patreon. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community, where you will get access to exclusive, true stories that are even better, significantly longer, and filled with detailed situations we simply cannot make public on YouTube, all performed by multiple emotional voice actors within a single story. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code displayed on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link located in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Let us begin today's journey into the corporate abyss, told through the eyes of our protagonist, Violet Brooks. The air conditioning in the Human Resources office was always set to a temperature that felt slightly hostile. I sat in a sleek, uncomfortable leather chair, my clothes still carrying the distinct, bitter aroma of stale espresso and the metallic tang of overheated server racks. I had not slept a single minute during the night. For the past 14 hours, I had been locked inside the subterranean data center, manually rerouting power and rewriting corrupt registry files to stop a catastrophic network failure from wiping out our entire operational database. I had quite literally kept the company breathing while the rest of the world slept. Across the polished mahogany desk sat Richard Sterling, our chief executive officer, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my first car. Next to him was Brenda, the director of human resources, her hands neatly folded over a manila folder, her face arranged into a mask of practiced corporate sympathy. "Violet, we are going to have to let you go," Richard said. The words dropped into the quiet room like heavy stones. I stared at him, feeling the exhaustion pulling at the corners of my eyes. I did not scream. I did not demand an explanation. I just waited for the punchline. "You missed the mandatory company culture sync meeting at 8 o'clock this morning," Richard continued, his tone smooth and devoid of any actual human emotion. "We have made it abundantly clear that attendance at these alignment sessions is non-negotiable." "I was in the basement," I replied, my voice steady, sounding remarkably calm despite the burning fatigue in my chest. The main routing hub suffered a critical cascade failure at 2 in the morning. If I had left the terminal to attend a culture meeting at 8, Vanguard Meridian would currently have 0 functional databases. I saved the network. Richard waved a hand dismissively, as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "That is what the IT support desk is for. Violet, leadership requires absolute discipline. We are building a culture of unified vision, and there are absolutely no exceptions for anyone. When you disregard direct scheduling mandates, you undermine the structural integrity of this entire organization." He spoke in empty buzzwords. He completely ignored the fact that 25 years ago, I was sitting on a milk crate in a dusty garage with the original founder, writing the very foundational code that made this company exist. I had built the walls he was currently hiding behind. For 25 years, I had sacrificed my weekends, my holidays, and my sleep for Vanguard Meridian. And now, I was being discarded over a missed morning motivational speech. Brenda slid the manila folder across the glossy surface of the desk. The friction of the paper against the wood sounded deafening in the suffocating silence. "This is your severance agreement," Brenda said, tapping a manicured fingernail against the bottom of the page. "It includes a standard non-disclosure agreement because of the clear violation of company policy regarding the mandatory meeting. The board has authorized a severance payout of exactly 3 weeks of your base salary. You need to sign it right now so we can process your exit gracefully. 3 weeks, 25 years of my life, boiled down to 3 weeks of pay and a gag order," They wanted me to take their pennies, shut my mouth, and disappear out the back door so Richard could feel like an undisputed king in his glass castle. They expected tears. They expected me to beg for my job, to plead about my mortgage, or to erupt into a fit of righteous rage. People like Richard thrive on that kind of desperation. It validates their power. Instead, I felt my lips curve upward into a faint, icy smile. The pure audacity of their ignorance was almost beautiful. I looked down at the pen Brenda had placed meticulously next to the document. I did not touch it. I reached up to my collar and unclipped my employee identification badge. The plastic card felt entirely weightless in my hand. I placed it gently on top of the severance agreement. The small clack of the plastic hitting the desk echoed sharply in the quiet room. "No," I said softly. "I will not be signing that." Richard blinked, his arrogant composure faltering for a fraction of a second. "Violet, if you do not sign, you walk away with nothing." "I think I will survive, Richard," I replied. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my coffee-stained shirt. The silence in the room shifted from dominant to uncertain. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but I simply turned my back and walked toward the heavy glass door. I did not look back. I did not pack up the family photos on my desk or the little souvenirs I had collected over 2.5 decades. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, isolating Richard and Brenda in their sterile little box, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I did not need to take a single physical item from this building. The most valuable asset this company possessed did not belong to Vanguard Meridian at all. It had always belonged to me, and tomorrow morning, they were going to find out exactly how much that truth was worth. The drive back to my suburban house was entirely devoid of the simmering rage one might expect after a brutal firing. I unlocked my front door, stepped inside, and let the profound silence of the empty living room wash over me. I did not throw my keys against the wall or curse Richard Sterling's name. I walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and methodically brewed a cup of chamomile tea. The ceramic mug was warm against my palms, a stark contrast to the icy corporate sterility I had just left behind. I carried the tea into my home office, a room dominated by a heavy oak desk and a single, high-powered personal laptop. I sat down, the leather of my chair creaking softly in the quiet house, and lifted the lid of the machine. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale, bluish glow across my face. I did not open a web browser to search for new job postings. Instead, my fingers danced across the keyboard, launching an independent, heavily encrypted command terminal that existed entirely outside the network architecture of Vanguard Meridian. Lines of glowing green text scrolled rapidly down the black screen as I bypassed my own security protocols. I brought up a customized dashboard monitoring a very specific, continuous flow of encrypted data. The data packets were visualized as a steady, pulsing river of white light against a dark background. It was a beautiful, silent symphony of information processing, and it was entirely mine. 15 years ago, long before Richard ever sat in the executive chair, Vanguard Meridian had encountered a massive security bottleneck. Our legacy systems were hemorrhaging packet drops, creating a vulnerability that threatened to compromise our entire client database. I had pleaded with the executive board for the budget to rebuild the routing architecture. They refused, citing strict quarterly profit margins. So, over the course of 8 consecutive weekends, sitting at this very desk on my own personal hardware, I wrote a solution. I built a custom API protocol from scratch. I named it Aegis Gateway. It was an elegant, flawless piece of engineering that acted as an impenetrable bridge between external data sources and our internal servers. The company gleefully implemented it, completely ignoring the fact that because they refused to fund its creation, they never actually owned it. Over the years, Aegis Gateway evolved. It grew from a simple patch into the absolute backbone of the company's data infrastructure. Just last month, Vanguard Meridian had secured the crown jewel of their portfolio, a massive logistics software contract with the Department of Defense. It was a deal worth $2.4 billion. The military required real-time, military-grade encryption for their global supply chain tracking. the only piece of architecture at Vanguard Meridian capable of handling that specific, heavy-duty encrypted load was my Aegis gateway. Every single byte of that defense data was currently flowing through my personal proprietary protocol. But there was a catch. A small, brilliant technical failsafe I had hard-coded into the architecture a decade ago. I had granted the company usage rights to Aegis Gateway through a daily, auto-renewing digital license. That license pinged the Vanguard Meridian Human Resources server every 24 hours to verify one single condition. It checked to see if my employee identification number was listed under an active working status. I glanced at the digital clock in the corner of my screen. It read 11:58 at night. I took a slow sip of my tea. The warmth spread through my chest as the minutes ticked by. 11:59. The river of white data on my screen continued to flow smoothly, entirely unaware of the impending cliff. Brenda and her human resources department were nothing if not ruthlessly efficient. I knew exactly how their automated systems worked. At the stroke of midnight, the daily batch files would run, and my employee profile would be permanently shifted from active to terminated. 58 seconds, 59 seconds, 12 o'clock exactly. The digital license pinged the human resources server. The server returned a negative response. My status was terminated. Instantly, an automated self-destruct command executed within the Aegis protocol. On my screen, the pulsing river of white light stopped dead. In a fraction of a second, the glowing data stream vanished, replaced by an endless, impenetrable wall of absolute black. The license was revoked. The bridge was burned. The entire Department of Defense data stream flowing into Vanguard Meridian had just crashed into a brick wall. I smiled. A genuine, relaxed smile. I reached out and gently closed the laptop. The room plunged into comforting darkness. I walked to my bedroom, pulled the covers up to my chin, and fell into the deepest, most restful sleep I had experienced in 25 years. The morning sun streamed brightly through my bedroom window, waking me naturally for the first time in over 2 decades. I stretched, enjoying the unfamiliar sensation of a full night of rest, and glanced at the bedside clock. It was exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. I rolled over and reached for my phone resting on the nightstand. The screen was a chaotic, vibrating mosaic of absolute panic. There were exactly 214 missed calls. My inbox was completely choked with hundreds of emails, all flagged with glowing red urgent priority icons. I did not feel a single ounce of anxiety. I simply tossed the phone onto the mattress, walked into the bright kitchen, and started preparing a leisurely breakfast. Meanwhile, halfway across the city, the executive control room at Vanguard Meridian looked like the command deck of a sinking ship. Richard Sterling was no longer the composed, arrogant king who had sat in the Human Resources office yesterday. His expensive bespoke suit jacket lay crumpled on the floor in the corner of the room. His silk tie was yanked entirely loose, and he was sweating profusely, screaming at a room full of terrified network engineers. The giant digital data displays covering the walls, which usually showed a steady, comforting stream of global logistics data, were flashing a blinding, catastrophic red error code. Fix it right now, Richard roared, slamming his open palms against a heavy glass conference table. I do not care what security protocols you have to bypass. I do not care what you have to break. Get the external servers back online this very second. The lead systems engineer, pale and visibly trembling, looked up from his frantic typing at the console. We cannot get in. Richard, the entire gateway protocol is locked behind an encryption wall we have never seen before. The code is not just failing. It has completely vanished from our internal registry. We are completely blacked out. Just outside the glass walls of the control room, Marcus Thorne, the chief legal officer of the company, was pacing furiously down the hallway. Marcus was a man who solved corporate problems by crushing people with expensive, drawn-out litigation. He had just gotten off a terrifying, high-stakes phone call with a 4-star general at the Pentagon. The military brass did not care about Vanguard Meridian's internal technical difficulties. They cared that their global supply chain tracking system had just gone totally blind. The general had delivered a very clear, uncompromising ultimatum. If the tracking system was not fully operational within 24 hours, the Department of Defense was going to cancel the $2.4 billion contract immediately and launch a full federal investigation into the company's security practices. Marcus snatched his phone from his pocket, his face flushed with uncontrollable rage, and dialed my number for what was now the 215th time. Back in my quiet kitchen, I watched the phone screen light up with Marcus's name. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my toast, swallowed, and finally swiped the green answer button. I put the device on speaker and set it down gently on the cool granite counter. "Violet," Marcus bellowed into the receiver. His voice was entirely devoid of the smug, corporate superiority he usually carried around the office. It was replaced by a shrill, desperate panic disguised as righteous anger. "You are going to stop this malicious sabotage right this second. I am ordering you to provide the recovery passwords and restore network access immediately, or so help me God. I will ruin your entire life." I calmly poured myself a glass of orange juice. "Good morning, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying the sharp chill of a winter breeze. "I am afraid you are entirely mistaken. I am not sabotaging anything." "Do not play semantic games with me," Marcus shrieked, the harsh sound echoing through the phone's small speaker. "You deliberately crashed the Department of Defense gateway. You are holding vital company assets hostage." "I no longer work for Vanguard Meridian," I explained, speaking slowly and clearly as if I were addressing a particularly stubborn child. "Richard made that abundantly clear yesterday morning. When your automated human resources system terminated my employment status at exactly midnight, it simply triggered a standard legal revocation. My proprietary protocol, Aegis Gateway, automatically withdrew its usage license. I did not crash your system. Marcus, your system just stopped having legal permission to access my personal intellectual property." There was a sharp, furious intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Your intellectual property?" Marcus spat out the words like venom. "You wrote that code while you were employed by this company. That makes it the exclusive property of Vanguard Meridian. This is corporate theft. Violet, I will drag you into federal court. I will personally see to it that you are thrown into a penitentiary for industrial espionage. You are going to give me that access code right now, or I swear to you." I reached out and tapped the red button on the screen, cutting off his unhinged, screaming mid-sentence. The sudden return of silence in my kitchen was absolutely blissful. I picked up the phone, opened my email application, and composed a new message addressed directly to Marcus Thorne. I attached a single, high-resolution scanned document to the email. It was a piece of paper I had kept safely locked inside a fireproof safe in my bedroom closet for exactly 15 years. I hit send, visualizing the precise moment the notification would pop up on his screen in that chaotic, sweating control room. I did not need to be in the building to hear the deafening, horrific silence that was about to crash down over the entire legal department of Vanguard Meridian. The PDF I sent to Marcus was only 2 pages long, but in the realm of corporate law, those 2 pages were the equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike. I knew exactly what was happening in Marcus's office the moment his eyes scanned the digital document. He was a man who made his living exploiting loopholes, but the paper staring back at him was an impenetrable fortress. It was an intellectual property waiver, drafted and executed exactly 15 years ago. More importantly, resting at the very bottom of the second page, signed in thick blue ink, was the signature of Arthur Vance, the retired founder and original visionary of Vanguard Meridian. The legal language was neither vague nor open to interpretation. It explicitly stated that the protocol known as Aegis Gateway was developed entirely on personal time, utilizing strictly personal hardware, and that Vanguard Meridian held absolutely no claim to its underlying architecture. The company was merely granted a non-exclusive, revocable license to borrow the technology, a license contingent upon my active employment status. I could picture the exact moment the remaining blood drained from Marcus's face. He and Richard had not just fired an insubordinate employee, they had aggressively amputated the only legal bridge connecting the company to its most critical asset. They had no grounds to sue. They had no basis for a criminal complaint. They had meticulously constructed their own trap and confidently locked themselves inside. By 9:30 in the morning, the whispers of a catastrophic blackout had escaped the tightly sealed walls of the executive floor and bled into the trade press. Wall Street absolutely hates uncertainty, but it aggressively punishes incompetence. The moment the New York Stock Exchange opened, the financial bleeding began. Financial news networks began running scrolling banners at the bottom of their screens, citing anonymous insider sources, reporting a complete failure of Vanguard Meridian's military-grade logistics architecture. Within the first 2 hours of morning trading, the company's stock price plummeted by a staggering 15%. Millions of dollars in market capitalization were evaporating into thin air with every passing minute. The situation escalated from a severe corporate crisis to an existential threat precisely at noon. Heavily encrypted, formal communication arrived directly from the Department of Defense. It was not another angry phone call from a general. It was a written, legally binding ultimatum from the federal government. The document outlined a severe breach of national security protocols due to the sudden data blackout. The terms were absolute. If full operational capacity was not completely restored by exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the Pentagon would immediately terminate the entire $2.4 billion contract. Furthermore, they would impose crippling federal sanctions for gross negligence in managing classified infrastructure. The sheer gravity of the federal threat was the final catalyst needed to awaken the sleeping giant above Richard's head, the board of directors, a group of notoriously unforgiving billionaires who usually only cared about quarterly dividend reports, suddenly descended upon the situation. My phone buzzed with news alerts, indicating that an emergency board session had been convened. They were demanding an immediate, comprehensive explanation from Richard regarding this catastrophic technical failure. Richard was trapped in a vice of his own making. He could not possibly stand before the board and confess that he had jeopardized a multi-billion-dollar government alliance just to enforce attendance at an 8 o'clock morning culture sync meeting. He needed a miracle, and he needed it before 5 o'clock. At 1:15 in the afternoon, my laptop chimed with an incoming message. It was a direct, private email from Richard Sterling. The subject line was blank. I opened it and read the frantic, pathetic words of a man watching his empire crumble. The arrogant, untouchable chief executive who had sat across from me yesterday was completely gone. Violet, the email began. I firmly believe there has been a monumental misunderstanding regarding the events of yesterday morning. We acted in haste, and I am personally reaching out to rectify this situation. Vanguard. Meridian needs you. I am prepared to offer you immediate reinstatement with a guaranteed triple increase to your base salary, along with a substantial portfolio of premium bonus stock options. You will bypass human resources entirely and report directly to me as an executive vice president. I only ask that you log in and restore the routing systems immediately, and we can keep the unfortunate details of yesterday's meeting strictly between us. Please call me the second you read this. I read the email twice. The desperation practically oozed from the glowing pixels on my screen. He was begging. He was trying to buy my silence and my compliance with company money, hoping to sweep his monumental failure under the rug before the board could uncover the truth. He thought I was playing a game of leverage, trying to squeeze a better salary out of the crisis. He genuinely did not understand that this was no longer a negotiation about employment. I did not return his call. Instead, I sent a brief reply containing a single, encrypted video conference link scheduled for 1:30 in the afternoon. When the digital clock on my screen struck the half hour, the video feed connected. Richard's face filled my monitor. He looked hollowed out. His hair, usually styled to perfection, was completely unkempt. The background of his camera showed the chaotic blur of the executive suite, people running back and forth behind the glass walls. Violet, thank God, Richard breathed, leaning heavily into his microphone. Listen to me. I have the amended employment contract right here on my desk. Triple base salary, Executive Vice President of Digital Infrastructure. Effective immediately. Just give me the verbal confirmation. Send over the gateway keys, and we can put this entire nightmare behind us. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on my desk. I had changed out of my casual morning clothes into a sharply tailored navy blazer. I did not look like a disgruntled employee. I looked like a peer. "Richard," I began, my voice incredibly soft, forcing him to strain to hear me. "I think you fundamentally misunderstand the nature of this video call. I am not attending an interview for reinstatement." Richard frowned, his eyes darting around his screen. "What are you talking about? I am offering you exactly what you want. I no longer desire employment at Vanguard Meridian," I stated flatly. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, I am the founder and sole president of Aegis Systems Incorporated, a registered independent technology firm. You are no longer speaking to a subordinate. Richard, you are speaking to a vendor, and currently, you are illegally trespassing on my firm's proprietary architecture." The color drained from his face. "A vendor?" I clicked a button, sharing my screen with him. A meticulously drafted, 50-page licensing agreement appeared before his eyes. It was airtight. Drafted by a premium corporate legal team I had retained at Dawn, using my own savings. "Vanguard Meridian requires immediate, uninterrupted access to my gateway to fulfill your obligations to the Department of Defense," I explained, guiding my cursor over the highlighted terms. "My company is willing to grant you an enterprise-level, non-exclusive license to utilize the Aegis Gateway Protocol. The terms are non-negotiable. The annual licensing fee is exactly 10% of the total value of your defense contract. That equates to $240 million a year. The first year must be paid in full, via direct wire transfer, the moment this document is signed." Richard let out a sound that was half gasp, half laugh. It was the sound of a man losing his grip on reality. $240 million? Are you out of your mind? That is extortion. It is a standard enterprise licensing fee for proprietary military-grade encryption, I corrected him smoothly. Additionally, Clause 4 mandates that Vanguard Meridian must issue a global press release by tomorrow morning, publicly acknowledging that your entire defense logistics framework relies exclusively on technology provided by Aegis Systems Incorporated. I want my credit. Richard, publicly." He slammed his fist onto his desk, the webcam shaking violently. "I will never sign this. Never. You are holding a gun to the head of this company. I will have you investigated for federal racketeering." I calmly glanced down at the small digital clock resting on my desk. "You have exactly 3.5 hours before the Pentagon turns your entire company into ash," I said, my tone completely devoid of empathy. "Every 30 minutes you hesitate. The base price of this contract increases by $10 million. It is currently 1:32 in the afternoon. At 2 o'clock, the fee becomes $250 million. Richard stared at the screen, his chest heaving. The sheer, suffocating weight of his own arrogance was crushing him. He was a man who had built his entire identity on absolute dominance, on never losing a battle, on crushing anyone beneath him who dared to step out of line. To sign this document meant surrendering everything to a woman he had casually discarded just yesterday. It meant admitting total, humiliating defeat. "I am the chief executive officer of this company," Richard hissed, his voice dropping into a venomous, irrational growl. "I would rather watch the Department of Defense rip up that contract and let the stock burn to the ground before I ever surrender $250 million to a low-level coder. You are bluffing. You will not let your own creation die." I was choosing professional suicide. His ego was so massive, so incredibly fragile, that he was genuinely prepared to sink a multi-billion-dollar empire and destroy the livelihoods of thousands of employees just to avoid the personal humiliation of conceding to me. The stalemate had reached its absolute peak. He thought his authority as chief executive gave him the final say on the matter. He was entirely unaware that I had already bypassed him completely. Before Richard could draw another breath to spew his vitriol, a loud, synthetic chime echoed through the digital conference room. The interface on my screen shifted, dividing into a grid of 6 separate video feeds. Richard's eyes darted wildly across his monitor as the faces of the Vanguard Meridian Board of Directors populated the screen. Sitting dead center was Eleanor Wright, the formidable chairwoman of the board, looking as cold and unyielding as a glacier. "Richard," Eleanor's voice cut through the digital space like a steel blade. You will close your mouth and remain entirely silent for the remainder of this conversation. Richard stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Eleanor, what is the meaning of this? This is a private executive negotiation. It ceased being private the moment Ms. Brooks carbon copied me on your pathetic, pleading email an hour ago, along with the full draft of her new licensing agreement, Eleanor replied sharply. We have been quietly monitoring this feed for the past 10 minutes. Richard, we have heard every single word. The look of utter devastation that washed over Richard's face was a masterpiece. I had been completely outmaneuvered. I had not just laid a trap, I had invited the executioners to watch him step into it. Eleanor turned her piercing gaze toward my camera. Ms. Brooks, let me be absolutely clear. Is it true that our chief executive officer terminated your employment yesterday morning, purely because you were 15 minutes late to a culture alignment meeting, while you were actively preventing a total server collapse? That is precisely correct, Eleanor, I answered evenly. He deemed my absence a fatal breach of absolute discipline. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the board members. The sheer absurdity of the situation hung in the air. A multi-billion-dollar enterprise was currently burning to the ground because one man's fragile ego could not handle an employee prioritizing a critical crisis over his morning motivational speech. Richard Sterling, Eleanor announced, her voice devoid of any warmth. Your actions constitute a catastrophic failure of risk management and a gross dereliction of your fiduciary duties. You have single-handedly jeopardized a $2.4 billion federal contract and destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars in shareholder value in a single morning. By the power vested in this board, you are hereby terminated as Chief Executive Officer, effective this exact second. Security is waiting outside your door. You will leave the building immediately. Richard tried to speak, to beg, but one of the board members simply muted his microphone. He was nothing more than a silent, thrashing fish on a screen. A moment later, his video feed abruptly went black. Eleanor did not miss a beat. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked back at me. Ms. Brooks, it is currently 4:50 in the afternoon. We have exactly 10 minutes before the Department of Defense terminates our existence. We accept your terms in full. I am electronically signing the enterprise licensing agreement right now. There was no bargaining. There was no hesitation. She knew exactly what position they were in. A soft notification pinged on my desktop. The document was signed. A moment later, a second. Much louder alert sounded from my secure banking portal. I opened the tab. An expedited corporate wire transfer had just cleared. I stared at the screen, watching my account balance swell by $240 million. The 9 digits sat there, a concrete testament to the true value of my life's work. The funds have been received, I confirmed. I typed a rapid sequence of commands into my terminal. The impenetrable wall of blackness on my secondary monitor instantly shattered, replaced once again by the beautiful, pulsing river of white light. Aegis Gateway is back online. Your data flow is fully restored. Good doing business with you, Eleanor. I did not wait for her reply. I clicked the red button and ended the call. The silence in my home office was profound. But this time, it was not the silence of an empty house. It was the silence of total, undisputed victory. I had not destroyed the company I helped build. I had merely excised the rod at the top. I took the power away from a man who was entirely unworthy of wielding it, and I forced the corporate machine to reprice my worth using a set of rules that no one could ever overturn. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and took a deep, deeply satisfying breath. Thank you so much for joining us today and listening to this story to the very end. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now? We always love reading your comments and knowing where our audience is located. If you enjoyed today's journey and felt that rush of righteous justice, please remember that YouTube has demonetized our channel, meaning we are forced to halt all new video uploads here in the near future. We are transitioning our primary operations to Patreon to keep these stories alive. Please help us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community, where you can listen to the absolute best Exclusive true stories that are too intense and detailed to make public on YouTube. You can support us by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and we will see you on the other side.